Long ago, in the early days of the world, when people lived much longer than they do today, there was a man named Enoch. This is not just any story. This is the amazing true story of a man who walked so close to God that something incredible happened to him. Something that had never happened before and would only happen to one other person in all of history. Picture a world very different from ours. A world where people lived for hundreds of years. A world where the memory of paradise was still fresh in some minds. A world where good and evil were locked in an ancient battle. In this world lived Enoch, a man who would become known as Pastor Enoch because of his incredible journey into the spiritual realm. The Bible tells us that Enoch lived 365 years, but it also tells us something much more amazing. It says that Enoch walked with God, and then one day he was not, because God took him. Enoch never died. He was taken straight to heaven while he was still alive. This is his story. What made Enoch so special? How did he become the kind of man who could walk with the creator of the universe? What did he see in the spiritual realm that changed everything? And what can we learn from his incredible journey? These are the questions we will explore as we follow Enoch from his early days as a young man to his final translation into heaven itself. This is a story of faith. This is a story of courage. This is a story of a man who dared to believe that God was real and that walking with him was possible. This is the story of Pastor Enoch and his entrance into the spiritual realm. Chapter 1: A Man Called by God. Enoch was born into a world that was quickly forgetting God. His great-great-great-grandfather was Adam, the first man God had created. The stories of the Garden of Eden were still told around campfires. People still remembered what it was like when God walked with man in the cool of the evening. But those days seemed long gone. The world was becoming dark. People were becoming wicked. They were forgetting about their Creator and doing whatever they wanted to do. Violence filled the earth. Greed and selfishness ruled in the hearts of men. It seemed like the light of God was fading from the world. But Enoch was different. Even as a young man, he felt something stirring in his heart. When he looked at the stars at night, he knew someone had put them there. When he watched the sun rise in the morning, he felt the presence of a mighty creator. While others were chasing after the things of this world, Enoch was searching for something more. When Enoch was 65 years old, something wonderful happened. He became a father. His son was named Methuselah, who would later become famous for living longer than any other person in history. But for Enoch, becoming a father changed everything. Holding his tiny baby boy in his arms, Enoch realized how precious life was. He understood that life came from God. From that moment forward, Enoch made a decision that would change his life forever. He decided to walk with God, not just to believe in God or to think about God sometimes, but to actually walk with him every single day. This was not easy in a world that was turning away from their Creator, but Enoch was determined. What does it mean to walk with God? For Enoch, it meant talking to God throughout the day. It meant listening for God's voice. It meant making choices that would please God instead of pleasing himself. It meant living like God was real and present. because he was. At first, walking with God was like learning to walk all over again. Enoch had to learn to quiet his mind so he could hear God's gentle voice. He had to learn to trust God even when he could not see him with his eyes. He had to learn to obey God even when it was difficult or when other people did not understand. But as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, something amazing began to happen. Enoch started to sense God's presence in a real way. When he prayed, it was not like talking to the empty air. It was like talking to a friend who was right there with him. When he read the stories passed down from his ancestors about God's mighty works, his heart burned within him. The people in Enoch's town began to notice that he was different. When they were angry, Enoch was peaceful. When they were worried, Enoch was calm. When they were greedy, Enoch was generous. When they spoke harsh words, Enoch spoke kind words. They could see that something had changed in this man. Some people were curious about the change they saw in Enoch. They would come to him with their problems and ask for his advice. They could see that he had wisdom that came from somewhere beyond this world. Enoch would tell them about his walk with God. He would encourage them to seek the Lord for themselves. Other people were not happy about Enoch's new life. They thought he was strange. They made fun of him for spending so much time in prayer. They laughed at him for talking about God so much. But Enoch did not let their words discourage him. He knew that walking with God was more important than pleasing people. As the years went by, Enoch's relationship with God grew stronger and stronger. What had started as a decision to walk with God was becoming a deep friendship. Enoch found that he could talk to God about anything: his fears, his hopes, his questions, his joys. God was always there to listen. And slowly, Enoch began to realize that God was talking back to him, not with a loud voice that everyone could hear, but with a still, small voice that spoke to his heart. God began to show Enoch things about the future. He began to reveal to him secrets about the spiritual realm that exists all around us, even though we cannot see it with our natural eyes. This was just the beginning of Enoch's incredible journey. He had no idea that God was preparing him for something that had never happened before in the history of the world. He was being prepared to enter the spiritual realm in a way that no human being ever had. He was being prepared to become Pastor Enoch, the man who would bridge the gap between earth and heaven. Chapter 2: The Preacher of Righteousness. As Enoch continued to walk with God, his role in the world began to change. He was no longer just a man trying to live a good life. God was calling him to be something more. He was calling him to be a preacher, a prophet, a voice crying out in the darkness of his generation. The world around Enoch was getting worse every day. People were becoming more violent, more selfish, more wicked. They had almost completely forgotten about God. They lived as if there was no creator, no judgment, no eternity. They lived only for the pleasures and desires of the moment. But God had not forgotten about the world, and he had not given up on the people he had created. He chose Enoch to be his messenger, to warn people about what was coming if they did not turn back to him. This is how Enoch became known as Pastor Enoch, the preacher of righteousness. It was not easy for Enoch to become a preacher. He was a quiet man by nature. He preferred spending time alone with God to standing in front of crowds of people. But when God calls someone to do something, He also gives them the power to do it. God gave Enoch boldness and courage he never knew he had. Enoch began to travel from town to town, sharing the message God had given him. He would stand in the marketplaces and on the street corners, calling people to remember their Creator. His message was simple but powerful. He told people that God loved them and wanted to have a relationship with them. But he also warned them that if they continued to live in wickedness, judgment would come. The response to Enoch's preaching was mixed. Some people were moved by his words. They could see the sincerity in his eyes and feel the power of God behind his message. These people repented of their sins and began to walk with God, just as Enoch had taught them. But many others rejected Enoch's message. They did not want to hear about God or judgment or righteousness. They were happy with their wicked lives and did not want to change. They mocked Enoch and called him crazy. Some even threatened to hurt him if he did not stop preaching. But Enoch did not stop. He could not stop. The word of God burned in his heart like a fire. He had to speak what God had shown him, even if it meant facing opposition and persecution. This is what made him a true pastor. He cared more about the souls of the people than he did about his own comfort and safety. As Enoch preached, something amazing began to happen. God started to give him visions and revelations about things that were to come. Enoch would see pictures in his mind of future events. He would dream dreams that showed him what God was planning to do in the world. One of the most important visions God gave to Enoch was about the great flood that would come upon the earth. God showed him that because of the wickedness of mankind, he would have to cleanse the earth with water. Only Noah and his family would be saved because they would trust in God and obey his commands. This vision filled Enoch's heart with both sadness and urgency. He was sad to see the destruction that would come upon the earth because of sin. But he was also filled with urgency to warn as many people as possible before it was too late. He knew that God did not want anyone to perish, but wanted all people to come to repentance. Enoch also received visions about the end times, the last days before Jesus would return to the earth. He saw the final judgment, when all wickedness would be destroyed and righteousness would reign forever. He saw the new heaven and the new earth that God would create for those who loved him. These visions were both wonderful and terrible. They were wonderful because they showed God's ultimate plan to restore all things and make everything right. They were terrible because they showed the fate of those who continued to reject God and live in rebellion against him. When Enoch shared these visions with the people, some were frightened and turned to God for mercy. Others became angry and accused him of trying to scare them with made-up stories. But Enoch knew that what he had seen was real. He had been to the throne room of God in the Spirit. He had seen the future with his own eyes. As Pastor Enoch continued his ministry, his reputation spread throughout the land. Some called him a holy man and a prophet of God. Others called him a troublemaker and a fanatic, but no one could deny that there was something different about him. When he spoke, there was power in his words. When he prayed, things happened. When he laid hands on the sick, they were healed. Enoch's son, Methuselah, grew up watching his father's incredible ministry. He saw how his father walked with God every day. He saw the miracles and the visions. He saw the way God used his father to touch the lives of many people. This had a profound impact on Methuselah's own faith and relationship with God. Through Methuselah, Enoch became the great-grandfather of Noah, the man who would build the ark and preserve mankind through the great flood. This was no accident. God was working through Enoch's family line to preserve a remnant of righteous people on the earth. But even as Enoch faithfully carried out his calling as a preacher and prophet, God was preparing him for something even greater. His years of walking with God, his faithful ministry to the people, and his willingness to see into the spiritual realm were all preparing him for the most incredible experience any human being has ever had. Chapter 3: Visions of Heaven. After Enoch had been walking with God for many years, something extraordinary began to happen. His spiritual eyes were opened wider than ever before. God began to take him on journeys into the spiritual realm, showing him things that no human being had ever seen. These were not just dreams or imagination. These were real spiritual experiences where Enoch's spirit was caught up into the heavenly places while his body remained on earth. It was during these incredible journeys that Enoch truly became Pastor Enoch, not just a preacher to people on earth, but a messenger who had actually been to heaven and back. The first time this happened, Enoch was alone in prayer, as he often was. He had found a quiet place away from the noise and distractions of the world. As he prayed, he felt the presence of God come upon him in a way that was stronger than anything he had ever experienced before. Suddenly, Enoch felt like he was being lifted up, not his physical body, but his spirit. It was as if invisible hands were gently pulling him upward, higher and higher, until the earth below became small and distant. He was traveling through what seemed like layers of clouds and light, moving faster than any bird could fly. When the sensation of movement stopped, Enoch found himself standing in a place that took his breath away. He was in heaven itself, the realm where God lives. Everything around him was bright and beautiful beyond description. The light was not harsh like the sun, but warm and gentle like the perfect dawn. The ground beneath his feet seemed to be made of something like crystal, clear and pure and strong. There were colors everywhere that Enoch had never seen before, colors that do not exist on earth. The very air seemed to sparkle with the glory of God. And there was music, the most beautiful music Enoch had ever heard, coming from every direction, but not loud or overwhelming. As Enoch looked around in wonder, he began to see the inhabitants of this amazing place. Angels were everywhere, beings of light and power who served God with perfect joy and dedication. Some were tall and majestic, with wings that gleamed like polished metal. Others moved like flames of fire, dancing and singing praises to the Almighty. The angels noticed Enoch and were amazed to see a human being in their realm. They gathered around him, not in a threatening way, but with curiosity and kindness. They had heard about mankind, but they had never seen one of God's earthly children in heaven before. They welcomed him and began to show him around this incredible place. One of the angels, whose name was Gabriel, became Enoch's special guide. Gabriel explained to Enoch that God had brought him here for a purpose. He was to see the wonders of heaven so that he could return to earth and tell people what awaited those who chose to walk with God. Gabriel led Enoch through different areas of heaven. They visited places where the prayers of God's people on earth were kept like precious treasures in golden bowls. They saw libraries containing the books of life, where the names of the righteous were written in letters of gold. They walked through gardens more beautiful than the original Garden of Eden, where the tree of life grew with leaves that could heal any sickness. But the most amazing sight of all was still to come. Gabriel brought Enoch to the throne room of God himself. As they approached this sacred place, Enoch felt both excitement and fear. He was about to see the creator of the universe face to face, something that no mortal man was supposed to be able to do and live. The throne room was vast beyond measurement. The throne itself seemed to be made of every precious stone that existed, blazing with light and glory. Around the throne were 4 living creatures, unlike anything Enoch had ever imagined, each with 6 wings and covered with eyes. They never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And there, seated on the throne, was God himself. Enoch could not look directly at him because his glory was too bright and too powerful, but he could sense his presence, his love, his majesty, his perfect righteousness. This was the God he had been walking with all these years. This was his friend, his father, his Lord. God spoke to Enoch, and his voice was like the sound of many waters, powerful but gentle. He told Enoch that he had been faithful in walking with him on earth, and now he wanted to show him even greater things. He was going to reveal to Enoch the secrets of the spiritual realm and the future of mankind. God showed Enoch the war that was raging in the spiritual realm between good and evil. He saw how angels battled against demons for the souls of men. He understood for the first time why it was so important for people to choose to walk with God. The spiritual battle was real, and every human soul was part of that battle. God also showed Enoch the books of prophecy, scrolls that contained the future history of the world. Enoch saw the great flood that would cleanse the earth. He saw the coming of the Messiah, who would die for the sins of mankind and rise from the dead. He saw the final judgment and the creation of the new heaven and new earth. After what seemed like hours, but could have been moments or years, God told Enoch that it was time for him to return to earth. He had work to do. He had people to reach. He had a message to preach that was more important than ever before. But now he would preach not just as someone who believed in heaven, but as someone who had actually been there. The journey back to earth was just as amazing as the journey to heaven had been. Enoch felt himself being gently lowered through the layers of the spiritual realm until he was back in his physical body, kneeling in the place where he had been praying. When Enoch opened his eyes, everything looked different. The world around him seemed dim and dull compared to the glory he had just witnessed. But his heart was burning with excitement and purpose. He had been to heaven, he had seen God, and now he had a story to tell that would change lives forever. Chapter 4: The Messenger Returns. When Enoch returned from his first journey to heaven, he was a changed man. The experience had marked him in ways that were visible to everyone around him. There was a new light in his eyes, a new authority in his voice, and a new power in his ministry. Pastor Enoch had become more than just a preacher. He was now a messenger who had been to the throne room of God. The first person Enoch told about his heavenly journey was his son Methuselah. The young man listened in amazement as his father described the wonders he had seen: the crystal floors, the singing angels, the throne of God blazing with glory. At first, it seemed too incredible to believe, but Methuselah could see the truth burning in his father's eyes. From that day forward, Enoch's preaching took on a new dimension. Before, he had spoken about God based on his faith and his daily walk with the Almighty. Now, he spoke as someone who had actually been to heaven and seen these things with his own eyes. When he described the glory of God, people could hear the wonder in his voice. When he warned about judgment, they could sense the urgency that came from someone who had seen the reality of eternity. Word about Enoch's heavenly vision spread quickly throughout the land. People came from far and wide to hear the man who claimed to have visited heaven and returned. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine hunger for God. Still others came to challenge him and try to prove that he was lying or deceived. But no one who heard Enoch speak could deny that something extraordinary had happened to him. The details he shared about heaven were so vivid and consistent that they had the ring of truth. More than that, there was a power in his words that touched people's hearts in ways that mere stories could not. As Pastor Enoch continued his ministry, the heavenly journeys did not stop with that first experience. God began taking him on regular trips to the spiritual realm, each time showing him new wonders and revealing new truths. Sometimes he would visit different areas of heaven. Other times, he would be taken to see the dark places where fallen angels were bound, waiting for judgment. On one of these journeys, Enoch was taken to see the place where the souls of the righteous dead were waiting for the resurrection. It was a place of peace and rest, where there was no more pain or sorrow. The people there were happy and filled with joy as they waited for the day when they would receive their new bodies and live forever in the presence of God. Enoch also saw the place where the wicked dead were kept, and it filled him with sadness and fear. It was a place of darkness and torment, where those who had rejected God in life faced the consequences of their choices. This vision gave Enoch even more urgency in his preaching. He understood that the choices people made in this life had eternal consequences. During another heavenly journey, Enoch was allowed to witness the counsels of God, where the Almighty and his angels discussed the affairs of earth. He heard them talking about individual people by name, showing how much God cared about each human being. He saw how God's heart was grieved by the wickedness of mankind, but also how his love never stopped reaching out to those who would turn to him. These experiences gave Enoch insights into the nature of God that went far beyond what any other human being possessed. He understood God's justice and mercy in perfect balance. He saw how God's love was not weak or sentimental, but powerful and holy. He learned that God's patience with mankind was great, but not unlimited. As Pastor Enoch shared these revelations with the people, his ministry began to bear fruit in remarkable ways. Some of the most hardened sinners were convicted by his words and turned to God with genuine repentance. Entire families and even whole communities began to seek the Lord after hearing Enoch's testimony about heaven. But the opposition to Enoch's ministry also grew stronger. The religious leaders of his day felt threatened by his claims of divine revelation. They accused him of blasphemy for saying that he had seen God and lived. The political leaders worried that his preaching about divine judgment might cause unrest among the people. Some tried to have Enoch arrested or silenced, but they found that they could not touch him. It was as if an invisible protection surrounded the man of God. When enemies approached him with harmful intent, they would suddenly become confused or afraid and turn away. When they tried to set traps for him, the traps would somehow fail to work. Enoch understood that this protection came from heaven. The angels he had met during his spiritual journeys were watching over him, making sure that he could complete the mission God had given him. This gave him great boldness in his preaching. He feared no man because he had stood before the throne of the Creator of the universe. As the years passed, Enoch's reputation as a holy man and prophet spread throughout the known world. People would travel for months just to hear him speak. Kings and rulers would send messengers asking for his counsel. But Enoch never let fame go to his head. He remained humble, knowing that everything he had came from God. The regular journeys to heaven also began to change Enoch in physical ways. His face would sometimes glow with a soft light, especially after he had been in prayer for long periods. His body seemed to be getting lighter, as if it was being prepared for something extraordinary. Some people noticed that he cast a fainter shadow than other people, as if part of him was already in the spiritual realm. Enoch himself began to sense that his time on earth was drawing to a close, not through death, but through something else entirely. In his conversations with God during his heavenly journeys, hints were dropped about a special destiny that awaited him. He was being prepared for something that had never happened to any human being before. But until that time came, Pastor Enoch continued his faithful ministry. Every day, he walked with God. Every chance he got, he shared the message of salvation and warned people about the coming judgment. And regularly, his spirit would be caught up to heaven, bringing back fresh revelations and new encouragements for God's people on earth. Chapter 5. Angels Among Us. As Enoch's spiritual journeys continued, he began to develop relationships with specific angels who served as his guides and teachers in the heavenly realm. These were not just brief encounters, but deep friendships that spanned both the earthly and heavenly dimensions. Through these relationships, Enoch learned about the vast organization of heaven and the constant activity of angels in human affairs. Gabriel remained his primary guide, but Enoch also came to know Michael, the great warrior angel who led God's armies in spiritual battles. Michael showed Enoch the ongoing war between good and evil that raged in the spiritual realm. Every day, angels and demons fought for influence over human hearts and minds. Every prayer from earth was like a call for reinforcements in this cosmic battle. Michael explained to Enoch that most people on earth had no idea how active the spiritual realm really was. Angels were constantly moving back and forth between heaven and earth, carrying out God's will, protecting his people, and working to bring about his plans. Some angels were assigned to watch over specific individuals. Others were responsible for entire cities or nations. During one memorable encounter, Michael took Enoch to observe a spiritual battle that was raging over a city where many people were beginning to turn to God because of Enoch's preaching. Enoch could see dark beings trying to fill people's minds with doubt and fear, while shining angels worked to strengthen their faith and protect them from spiritual attack. The battle was fierce and real, even though the people in the city below had no idea it was happening. Enoch watched as prayers from the earth rose up like arrows of light, giving strength to the angels and weakening the power of the dark forces. He saw how every act of faith and obedience from humans below provided ammunition for the angels in their fight against evil. This vision revolutionized Enoch's understanding of prayer and spiritual warfare. When he returned to earth, he began teaching people about the reality of the spiritual battle and the power they had to influence it through their prayers and righteous choices. His preaching became even more effective as people realized they were part of something much bigger than their daily earthly lives. Another angel who became important in Enoch's spiritual education was Uriel, the angel of God's fire and judgment. Uriel had a more serious demeanor than Gabriel or Michael, and his role was to show Enoch the consequences of sin and rebellion against God. These were some of the most difficult visions Enoch experienced, but they were necessary for him to understand the complete picture of God's character. Uriel took Enoch to see the places where fallen angels were imprisoned, waiting for their final judgment. These were beings who had once been beautiful and powerful servants of God, but who had chosen to rebel against their Creator. Now they were bound in chains of darkness, filled with rage and hatred, knowing that their doom was sealed. The sight of these fallen angels filled Enoch with both fear and sadness. Fear, because he could see the terrible consequences of choosing to oppose God. Sadness, because these beings had once been glorious creatures who had thrown away their blessed existence for the sake of pride and rebellion. Uriel explained to Enoch that these fallen angels were the source of much of the evil influence in the world. Though they were bound and could not act directly, they still managed to whisper lies and temptations into human hearts. They were the ones behind the growing wickedness that Enoch saw spreading across the earth. But Uriel also showed Enoch visions of the final judgment, when all evil would be completely destroyed and righteousness would reign forever. He saw the lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. He saw the new heaven and new earth, where sin would never again contaminate God's creation. These visions gave Enoch hope and motivated him to work even harder to reach people with God's message of salvation. Perhaps the most surprising relationship Enoch developed was with a group of angels whose job was to record the deeds of human beings. These angels, sometimes called the Watchers, kept detailed records of every word, thought, and action of every person who ever lived. They showed Enoch the great libraries of heaven where these records were stored. Seeing these records was both humbling and encouraging for Enoch. Humbling because he realized that every sin and failure was written down and remembered. Encouraging because he also saw that every act of faith and kindness was recorded too, and these good deeds shone like stars in the heavenly books. The Watchers explained to Enoch that these records would be used on the day of judgment, when every person would be evaluated based on their life choices. But they also showed him something wonderful. When a person truly repented and turned to God, their sins were blotted out of the books as if they had never been written. The blood of the coming Messiah would have the power to completely cleanse the record of anyone who put their faith in him. As Enoch spent more time with the angels, he began to understand their perspective on human life. They marveled at the fact that humans could choose to love God without seeing him. They were amazed by human faith, which they considered more precious than gold. Angels, who lived constantly in God's presence, could not understand how difficult it was for humans to believe in someone they could not see. Yet this is exactly what made human faith so valuable in God's eyes. The angels also helped Enoch understand prophecy and the future timeline of God's plan for humanity. They showed him visions that stretched from his own time all the way to the end of the world. He saw the great flood that would cleanse the earth in Noah's time. He saw the coming of the Messiah, who would die and rise again for the salvation of mankind. He saw the final return of Christ and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. These prophetic visions were given to Enoch not just for his own understanding, but so that he could share them with the people of his generation. Pastor Enoch became known not only as a preacher of righteousness, but as a prophet who could see into the future. His prophecies were so accurate and detailed that even his enemies had to admit there was something supernatural about his knowledge. But perhaps the most important thing the angels taught Enoch was about worship. In heaven, worship was not something that happened once a week or on special occasions. It was constant, joyful, and spontaneous. Every angel, every creature, every soul in heaven lived in a state of continuous praise and adoration for God. When Enoch returned to earth from these experiences, he brought this heavenly perspective on worship with him. His prayer times became more like worship services, filled with praise and thanksgiving rather than just requests for help. He taught the people who followed him to worship God, not just with their words, but with their whole lives, making every action an offering of love to their Creator. Chapter 6. Preparing for translation. As Enoch continued his unique ministry as a bridge between heaven and earth, both he and those around him began to notice extraordinary changes taking place. These were not just spiritual changes, though those continued to deepen. These were physical changes that seemed to be preparing Enoch for something unprecedented in human history. The changes began subtly. People noticed that Enoch seemed to need less food than other men. He could go for days with just small amounts of bread and water, yet his strength never seemed to diminish. In fact, he appeared to be growing stronger rather than weaker as he aged. His hair remained dark, his eyes stayed bright, and his step remained quick and sure. More remarkably, there were times when people would see Enoch from a distance and notice that he seemed to be glowing with a soft, gentle light. At first, people thought it was just the way the sunlight was hitting him, or perhaps their imagination. But as time went on, the glow became more obvious and more frequent. This light was especially noticeable when Enoch had been in prayer for extended periods. He would emerge from his prayer times with his face shining like Moses would later shine when he came down from Mount Sinai after meeting with God. The light was not harsh or blinding, but warm and peaceful, like the first rays of dawn. Enoch himself was aware of these changes, but he understood them as part of God's preparation for something special. During his heavenly journeys, the angels had begun to hint that his time on earth was drawing to a close, not because he would die like other men, but because God had a different plan for him. Gabriel, his primary angelic guide, explained to Enoch that his body was being transformed to be able to exist in the heavenly realm permanently. This had never been done before with a human being. Usually, when people visited heaven in spiritual visions, their spirits left their bodies behind on earth. But God was preparing to take Enoch to heaven completely, body and spirit together. This process of transformation was gradual and gentle. God was not going to shock Enoch's system by suddenly changing him from earthly to heavenly. Instead, he was slowly adjusting Enoch's physical nature to be compatible with the spiritual realm. It was like a diver slowly rising to the surface to avoid getting sick from the pressure change. During this time of preparation, Enoch's ministry took on a new urgency. He sensed that his time on earth was limited, and he wanted to reach as many people as possible with God's message before he left. He traveled more extensively than ever before, going to cities and towns he had never visited, preaching to crowds larger than any he had addressed before. The messages Enoch preached during this final period of his earthly ministry were some of the most powerful he had ever delivered. He spoke with the authority of someone who had spent extensive time in God's presence. He warned about the coming flood with the passion of someone who had seen it in prophetic vision. He promised eternal life to the faithful with the confidence of someone who had walked through heaven's gates. But Enoch also began to prepare the people for his departure. He told his closest followers that the time was coming when he would no longer be with them in the same way. He assured them that God would continue to speak to them and guide them, even without Enoch's physical presence. He appointed faithful men to continue the work of preaching and teaching after he was gone. His son Methuselah received special instruction during this time. Enoch knew that God's plan included preserving a line of righteous people through the coming flood, and that line would run through Methuselah to his grandson Noah. Enoch spent many hours with Methuselah, sharing the revelations God had given him and preparing his son to carry on the family's covenant with God. The transformation of Enoch's body continued to progress. People began to notice that his shadow was becoming fainter, as if he was becoming less solid and more spiritual. There were times when he seemed to be so light that a strong wind might blow him away. Yet he remained fully present and engaged with the people around him. During his prayer times, the changes were even more dramatic. Sometimes people would see him praying, and it would look like he was floating slightly above the ground. Other times, he would seem to become transparent, as if they were seeing through him to the world beyond. These phenomena frightened some people, but those who knew Enoch well understood that God was doing something special with his faithful servant. The angels who visited Enoch during this time explained that what was happening to him was a preview of what would eventually happen to all of God's people. In the future, when Christ returned to earth, all the righteous dead would be raised with new spiritual bodies that could exist in both earthly and heavenly realms. Enoch was receiving this transformation early as a special gift from God and as a sign of what was to come. As the physical changes became more pronounced, Enoch found that his spiritual abilities were also increasing. He could see angels and spiritual beings more clearly and more often. He could sense the spiritual condition of people just by looking at them. He could pray for the sick and see instant healings that amazed everyone who witnessed them. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Enoch's relationship with God himself. What had begun as a decision to walk with God had become something so intimate and constant that Enoch seemed to live simultaneously in both the earthly and heavenly realms. He could be having a conversation with someone on earth while also being aware of what was happening in heaven. The people who knew Enoch during this time realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. They understood that they were seeing a man who was being prepared for a destiny unlike any other human being. Some were excited to see what God would do. Others were sad, knowing that their beloved teacher and friend would soon be leaving them. But everyone who witnessed Enoch's transformation was left with an unshakable conviction that God was real, that heaven was real, and that faithful service to God led to rewards beyond anything the earthly mind could imagine. Pastor Enoch was living proof that the promises of God were true and that those who walked with him would never be disappointed. Chapter 7. The Final Journey. The day of Enoch's translation began like any other day, yet there was something different in the air. Those who were close to Enoch felt a sense of anticipation, as if something momentous was about to happen. Enoch himself woke up that morning with an unusual peace in his heart and a knowing that this would be his last day on earth as other men knew it. Enoch spent the early morning hours in prayer, as was his custom. But this time, his prayers had a different quality. He was not asking God for anything or interceding for others. Instead, he was simply communing with his Creator, enjoying the sweet fellowship that had sustained him for so many years. It was like a son talking with his beloved Father, sharing thoughts and feelings that needed no words. When Enoch emerged from his prayer time, his face was glowing more brightly than anyone had ever seen before. The light was so beautiful and peaceful that people were drawn to him like flowers, turning toward the sun. Yet there was also something about his appearance that made them realize this was no ordinary day. Methuselah was the first to approach his father. The younger man could see something in Enoch's eyes that he had never seen before. It was not sadness or fear, but a kind of joyful anticipation, like someone who was about to embark on the greatest adventure of his life. Father and son spent several hours together that morning, walking and talking about the things God had shown Enoch over the years. Enoch shared final words of wisdom and encouragement with Methuselah. He reminded his son of God's promises and urged him to continue walking with the Lord, no matter what challenges might come. Enoch also gave Methuselah specific instructions about preserving the revelations and prophecies God had given him. These words needed to be passed down to future generations, especially to Noah, who would need them during the time of the Great Flood. The knowledge of God's character and plans that Enoch had gained through his heavenly journeys was too precious to be lost. As the day progressed, other people came to see Enoch. Somehow, word had spread that this was a special day. Men and women who had been touched by his ministry over the years made their way to where he was. They came not because anyone had told them to, but because something in their hearts called them to be there. Enoch spent time with each person who came to see him. He prayed for them, blessed them, and spoke words of encouragement tailored to their specific needs and situations. It was as if God was giving him final opportunities to minister to these precious souls before his departure. As the afternoon wore on, Enoch announced that he wanted to take a walk. This was not unusual, as he often took long walks for prayer and meditation. But something about the way he said it made people realize this walk would be different from all the others. A small group of his closest friends and family members decided to accompany him. They walked together toward the hills outside the city, talking about the goodness of God and the wonderful things they had witnessed during Enoch's ministry. The conversation was sweet and peaceful, filled with gratitude for all that God had done among them. As they walked, people began to notice that Enoch seemed to be getting lighter with each step. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground. The glow around him was becoming brighter and more visible, even in the afternoon sunlight. There was also a sense of supernatural presence with them, as if invisible beings were accompanying their little group. When they reached a certain spot on the hillside, Enoch stopped walking. He turned to face his companions with a smile of pure joy on his face. Without anyone saying anything, they all knew that this was as far as they would go together. This was the place where Enoch would leave the earth and enter fully into the presence of God. Enoch spoke to each person individually, giving them final words of blessing and encouragement. He told them not to be sad about his departure, but to rejoice that God had chosen to honor him in this special way. He reminded them that this was not really goodbye, because they would see him again in heaven if they continued to walk faithfully with God. Then Enoch stepped away from the group and knelt down to pray. As he prayed, the light around him grew brighter and brighter. The air itself seemed to shimmer and vibrate with spiritual energy. Those watching felt like they were witnessing something sacred and holy, something that human eyes were rarely permitted to see. Suddenly, the sky above Enoch began to open. It was not like clouds parting, but like a doorway opening between heaven and earth. Through this opening, the watchers could see glimpses of the glorious realm that Enoch had visited so many times in the spirit. There were angels there, waiting to welcome him home. Enoch stood up and looked back at his friends one last time. His face was radiant with joy and anticipation. He raised his hand in a gesture of blessing and farewell. Then, without any visible force lifting him, he began to rise gently into the air. The ascension was gradual and peaceful. Enoch rose slowly toward the opening in the sky, his body becoming more and more radiant as he approached the heavenly realm. The angels who had been waiting descended to meet him, forming an honor guard around their friend who had served God so faithfully on earth. As Enoch disappeared into the heavenly realm, the opening in the sky slowly closed. The last thing the watchers saw was a brilliant flash of light, and then everything returned to normal. The sky looked just as it had before, but somehow everything was different. They had just witnessed something that no human beings had ever seen before or would see again until the second coming of Christ. The group stood in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process what they had just experienced. Then, one by one, they began to praise and worship God for the incredible privilege they had been given. They had seen their friend and teacher translated directly into heaven without experiencing death. They had witnessed the power and glory of God in a way that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. When they returned to the city and shared what they had seen, some people believed immediately. Others found it too incredible to accept. But no one could deny that Enoch was gone, and that those who claimed to have witnessed his translation were changed by the experience. Their faces glowed with a joy and certainty that convinced even the skeptics that something supernatural had occurred. Chapter 8. Heaven's Welcome. When Enoch passed through the heavenly portal, he found himself surrounded by a welcoming committee unlike anything he had experienced during his previous spiritual visits. This time was different because he was not coming as a visitor who would return to earth. He was coming home to stay, the first human being ever to enter heaven in his physical body without dying first. The angels who had guided him during his earthly journeys were there to greet him. Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, and countless others surrounded him with songs of celebration and joy. But there was someone else waiting for him too, someone whose presence filled Enoch with overwhelming love and gratitude. God himself had come to welcome his faithful servant home. The moment Enoch saw his Creator face to face without any veil or barrier between them, he fell down in worship. All those years of walking with God on earth had been wonderful, but they were nothing compared to this moment of perfect communion. Every question he had ever had was answered. Every longing in his heart was satisfied. He was home in the truest sense of the word. God lifted Enoch up and embraced him like a father embracing a beloved son who had been away on a long journey. The love that flowed between them was so powerful and pure that it seemed to light up all of heaven. The angels watching this reunion were amazed at the depth of relationship that could exist between the Creator and his creatures. God spoke to Enoch, and his voice was filled with pleasure and pride. He told Enoch that his faithfulness on earth had brought great joy to the heart of heaven. His willingness to walk with God when others were walking away, his courage in preaching righteousness when wickedness was popular, his humble service as a bridge between heaven and earth had all been noted and treasured. But God also explained to Enoch that his work was not finished. He had been brought to heaven not to rest in retirement, but to take on new responsibilities in the spiritual realm. Enoch would become a special ambassador between heaven and earth, helping to coordinate God's plans for humanity from the heavenly perspective. The first thing God did was take Enoch on a complete tour of heaven, showing him areas and dimensions he had never seen during his previous visits. Heaven was far larger and more complex than Enoch had ever imagined. There were realms within realms, each one designed for specific purposes in God's eternal plan. He saw the place where the souls of the righteous dead from all ages were gathered, waiting for the resurrection when they would receive their new bodies. These souls were filled with joy and peace, spending their time in worship and learning. They welcomed Enoch warmly, amazed to meet someone who had come to heaven without dying first. God also showed Enoch the workshops of heaven, where angels crafted beautiful things that would one day be part of the new earth. There were gardens being planned, cities being designed, and wonders being prepared that would delight the hearts of God's people for all eternity. Enoch was invited to participate in this creative work, adding his human perspective to the angelic designs. One of the most important places God showed Enoch was the Hall of Intercession, where the prayers of people on earth were received and processed. Enoch saw how every sincere prayer was treasured and answered, though not always in the way the person praying expected. He learned that he would have a special role in this hall, helping to coordinate answers to prayers and spiritual interventions on earth. God also revealed to Enoch the timeline of future events in much greater detail than he had ever seen before. He saw how the great flood would cleanse the earth and give humanity a fresh start through Noah's family. He saw the coming of the Messiah in vivid detail, understanding for the first time the full scope of God's plan for salvation. But perhaps most exciting of all, Enoch saw the end times and the second coming of Christ. He saw how he himself would return to earth with Jesus and all the angels for the final judgment. He would see his beloved earth restored to its original perfection, and he would help to rule and reign with Christ in the kingdom that would never end. As Enoch settled into his new life in heaven, he discovered that his love for the people he had left behind on earth had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger. From his heavenly perspective, he could see the spiritual battles his friends and family were facing. He could see how much they needed encouragement and protection. God allowed Enoch to become one of the intercessors for earth, praying for the people he had known and loved during his earthly ministry. His prayers were especially powerful because they came from someone who understood both the earthly and heavenly perspectives. He became an advocate in heaven for those who were struggling to walk with God on earth. Enoch also began to understand his role as a witness and example for future generations. His translation had been recorded in heaven's history books and would be passed down through human history as well. Thousands of years later, people would still read about Enoch and be encouraged that it was possible to walk so closely with God that he would take them to himself. The story of Enoch would give hope to every generation of believers. When they faced persecution for their faith, they would remember that Enoch had faced opposition too, but had remained faithful. When they wondered if their prayers were really heard, they would remember that Enoch's prayers had moved heaven. When they questioned whether their daily walk with God really mattered, they would remember that Enoch's daily faithfulness had earned him the ultimate reward. In heaven, Enoch began to write. Using materials that existed only in the spiritual realm, he recorded the visions and revelations God had given him. These writings would be preserved in heaven's libraries and would someday be revealed to God's people on earth when the time was right. They contained secrets about God's character, his plans for humanity, and the workings of the spiritual realm that would help believers for generations to come. As Enoch adjusted to his new existence in heaven, he never forgot his earthly origins. He remained the same humble, faithful man he had been on earth, but now he was that man perfected and glorified. He had become the first example of what all believers would someday become when they received their resurrection bodies and entered into perfect fellowship with God. The angels marveled at Enoch and what he represented. Through him, they gained a new appreciation for human faith and the incredible potential that existed in every person who chose to walk with God. Enoch became a bridge not only between heaven and earth, but between humanity and the angelic realm, helping each group understand and appreciate the other. Chapter 9: Legacy of the Translated. Back on earth, the impact of Enoch's translation rippled outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water. The people who had witnessed his departure could never be the same again. They had seen with their own eyes that the promises of God were true, that heaven was real, and that faithful service to the Almighty led to rewards beyond anything the human mind could imagine. Methuselah, Enoch's son, was profoundly affected by his father's translation. The experience strengthened his own faith and commitment to walk with God. He understood that he was now the keeper of his father's teachings and prophecies. The responsibility was enormous, but Methuselah embraced it with the same faithfulness that had characterized his father's life. Under Methuselah's leadership, the group of people who had been taught by Enoch continued to grow and thrive. They called themselves the sons of God, and they were known throughout the land for their righteousness, their kindness, and their powerful prayers. They became a light in a world that was growing darker with each passing generation. The story of Enoch's translation spread far beyond those who had witnessed it firsthand. Travelers carried the news from city to city, and the tale grew in the telling. Some versions were accurate, while others became embellished with legendary details. But the core message remained the same. A man had walked so closely with God that God had taken him to heaven without death. This story had different effects on different people. For those who were already seeking God, it provided tremendous encouragement. They realized that the relationship they longed for with their Creator was not only possible, but could lead to the most incredible rewards. Many people began to pray more earnestly, seeking to walk with God as Enoch had done. For others, the story of Enoch was a wake-up call about the reality of the spiritual realm. People who had been living only for earthly pleasures and pursuits began to consider eternal questions. If heaven was real enough for Enoch to be translated there, then perhaps they needed to think more seriously about their own spiritual condition. But there were also those who rejected the story entirely. They preferred to believe that Enoch had simply died in some remote location, and that his followers had made up the translation story to honor his memory. These skeptics worked hard to discredit the witnesses and spread doubt about what had really happened. Despite the opposition, the legacy of Enoch continued to influence the world. The prophecies he had received about the coming flood became more widely known. As the wickedness of mankind increased, thoughtful people began to wonder if the judgment Enoch had warned about was approaching. Methuselah played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting Enoch's teachings. He lived longer than any other human being in recorded history, reaching the age of 969 years. This extraordinary lifespan was no accident. God allowed Methuselah to live so long so that he could serve as a bridge between the generation of Enoch and the generation of Noah. Through Methuselah, the knowledge of God and his ways was passed down to Noah and his family. When the time came for the great flood, Noah was prepared because he had been raised on the teachings that came from Enoch's heavenly revelations. The instructions for building the ark, the understanding of God's judgment and mercy, the faith to obey God's seemingly impossible commands, all had their roots in what Enoch had learned during his walks with God and his journeys to heaven. The influence of Enoch's legacy extended even beyond the flood. After the waters receded and Noah's family began to repopulate the earth, they carried with them the stories and teachings that had been passed down from Enoch. These became part of the foundation of faith for all future generations. Throughout the centuries that followed, the story of Enoch continued to inspire and challenge believers. During times of persecution, they would remember that Enoch had faced opposition but had remained faithful. During times of spiritual dryness, they would be reminded that intimate relationship with God was possible. During times of doubt, they would recall that Enoch's translation proved the reality of heaven and the truth of God's promises. The Hebrew scriptures preserved the essential facts about Enoch in just a few verses, but those verses carried tremendous power. Genesis simply states that Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, because God took him. Hebrews adds that by faith, Enoch was translated so that he did not see death, and that before his translation, he had the testimony that he pleased God. These brief biblical references to Enoch became the seed that grew into a rich tradition of teachings about walking with God. Jewish rabbis, Christian scholars, and Islamic teachers all drew inspiration from Enoch's example. They used his story to encourage their students that the highest levels of spiritual achievement were within reach of anyone who was willing to commit themselves fully to God. The book of Jude in the New Testament preserves one of Enoch's prophecies about the second coming of Christ and the final judgment. This shows that Enoch's words continued to be remembered and valued many centuries after his translation. His prophetic insights remained relevant because they dealt with eternal truths and God's unchanging plans. Perhaps the greatest aspect of Enoch's legacy was the hope it provided for every believer. His translation was a preview of what awaited all the faithful. Just as Enoch had been taken to heaven without dying, so all believers would someday be caught up to meet the Lord in the air when Christ returned. Enoch's experience was the first example of what would happen on a much larger scale during the resurrection and rapture of the church. Even today, thousands of years after Enoch walked the earth, his story continues to impact lives. People who read about his translation are challenged to examine their own relationship with God. They ask themselves whether they are truly walking with the Lord or merely going through religious motions. They wonder if their own lives would be pleasing to God if He were to evaluate them today. The story of Pastor Enoch entering the spiritual realm remains one of the most powerful testimonies in all of Scripture about the possibility and rewards of intimate fellowship with God. It proves that the barrier between heaven and earth is not as solid as it might seem. For those who walk closely with their Creator, the spiritual realm becomes more real and more important than the physical world around them. Chapter 10: The Eternal Impact. As we reach the end of this remarkable story, we must consider the eternal significance of Enoch's life and translation. His journey from a man seeking God to Pastor Enoch, the bridge between heaven and earth, represents far more than just an interesting historical account. It stands as one of the most powerful testimonies in all of human history about the reality of God and the incredible potential that exists in every human soul. Enoch's story teaches us that walking with God is not just a nice religious idea, but a real possibility that can transform every aspect of our lives. When Enoch made the decision to walk with God after the birth of his son Methuselah, he was not starting a casual hobby or adding one more activity to his busy schedule. He was embarking on the greatest adventure any human being could ever experience. The daily choice to walk with God that Enoch made for 300 years demonstrates the power of consistent faithfulness. Enoch did not become the man who was translated to heaven overnight. It happened through day after day, year after year, of choosing to put God first in his life. Every morning he woke up and decided again to seek the Lord. Every evening he reflected on how he had walked with his Creator that day. This consistency in small things led to extraordinary results. Enoch's daily walks with God eventually became journeys into the spiritual realm. His personal relationship with his Creator grew into a ministry that touched thousands of lives. His private devotion became public preaching that changed his generation and influenced all future generations. The story also reveals the incredible patience and love of God toward human beings. God could have simply written off the human race when they began to turn away from him. Instead, he chose to work through faithful individuals like Enoch to keep the light of truth alive in the world. God's willingness to take time to develop a deep relationship with Enoch shows how much he values fellowship with his creatures. Enoch's role as Pastor Enoch, the preacher of righteousness, demonstrates that God never calls someone just for their own benefit. Enoch could have kept his relationship with God private and personal. Instead, God called him to share what he had learned with others. The visions, revelations, and spiritual experiences Enoch received were not just privileges for him to enjoy, but responsibilities to fulfill. The opposition Enoch faced for his faithful preaching reminds us that walking closely with God often brings challenges and persecution. Not everyone appreciated Enoch's message about righteousness and judgment. Some people mocked him, others threatened him, and many simply ignored what he had to say. But Enoch learned that the approval of God was more important than the approval of men. The spiritual journeys that Enoch experienced show us that there is far more to reality than what we can see with our physical eyes. The spiritual realm is not some distant, disconnected dimension. It is the underlying reality that gives meaning and purpose to everything that happens in the physical world. Enoch's ability to see into this realm and interact with angels and even with God himself proves that the barrier between seen and unseen is not absolute. These heavenly visits also reveal the incredible organization and activity of heaven. Angels are not mythical creatures from ancient stories, but real beings who serve God and work to carry out his plans on earth. The spiritual battles Enoch witnessed remind us that our daily lives are part of a much larger cosmic conflict between good and evil. Our prayers, our choices, and our faithfulness all have impact beyond what we can imagine. The physical changes that began to take place in Enoch as he approached his translation demonstrate that close fellowship with God affects every aspect of our being. Enoch's body began to be transformed because his spirit was being prepared for heaven. This gives us a glimpse of what awaits all believers when they receive their resurrection bodies and enter into perfect fellowship with God for eternity. Enoch's translation itself stands as the ultimate proof that God's promises are true and that faithful service to him leads to rewards beyond human imagination. Enoch never experienced death, decay, or the grave. Instead, he was taken directly from earth to heaven, from time into eternity, from the physical realm into the spiritual realm. This unprecedented event demonstrated God's power over death and his ability to fulfill even the most incredible promises. The impact of Enoch's life extended far beyond his own generation. Through his son Methuselah, his teachings and prophecies were preserved and passed down to Noah, who used them to prepare for and survive the great flood. Through Noah, Enoch's influence continued into all subsequent generations of humanity. The faithfulness of one man in walking with God literally helped to preserve the human race. But perhaps the most important lesson from Enoch's story is that it proves such a relationship with God is available to anyone who sincerely seeks it. Enoch was not born into a special family or given supernatural abilities that other people lacked. He was an ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice to walk with God. The same choice is available to every person who has ever lived. The New Testament tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God, and that those who come to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who diligently seek Him. Enoch is the perfect example of this principle in action. He believed that God existed, he sought Him diligently, and he received the ultimate reward of being taken directly into God's presence. Today, thousands of years after Enoch walked the earth, his example continues to challenge and inspire people all over the world. In an age when many people question whether God is real or whether faith makes any practical difference, Enoch's story stands as powerful evidence that relationship with the Creator is not only possible, but is the most rewarding pursuit any human being can choose. For those who are just beginning their spiritual journey, Enoch's story provides both encouragement and direction. It shows that no matter where you start, if you are willing to walk with God consistently and faithfully, He will meet you and guide you into deeper relationship with Himself. You do not have to be perfect to begin walking with God. You just have to be willing. For those who have been walking with God for many years, Enoch's example reminds us that there are always new depths of relationship to explore and new levels of service to embrace. Enoch never stopped growing in his relationship with God. Even after hundreds of years of walking with the Lord, he was still discovering new things about God's character and plans. The story of Pastor Enoch entering the spiritual realm ultimately points us forward to the hope that every believer shares. Just as Enoch was translated without seeing death, so the Bible promises that when Jesus returns, all the faithful will be caught up to meet Him in the air. Enoch's translation was the preview of the great reunion that awaits all of God's people. Until that day comes, Enoch's example calls us to live with eternal perspective, to walk closely with our Creator, to share His love with others, and to remain faithful no matter what challenges we may face. The man who started as a seeker became a pastor, a prophet, and finally, a permanent resident of heaven. His journey shows us what is possible when a human being chooses to make God the central reality of their life. In a world that often seems dark and hopeless, the story of Enoch shines like a bright star, reminding us that goodness is stronger than evil, that truth is more powerful than lies, and that those who walk with God will never walk alone. Pastor Enoch entered the spiritual realm not just for his own benefit, but to serve as an eternal witness that the promises of God are true, and that the hope of every believer will someday be fulfilled. This is the legacy of Enoch. This is the message of his remarkable life. This is the hope that his translation provides for every generation. God is real. Heaven is real. Walking with God is possible. And those who choose to seek him with all their hearts will find that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. May the story of Pastor Enoch inspire us all to walk more closely with our Creator, to seek him more diligently, and to live each day in the light of eternity. For if God could take Enoch from earth to heaven because of his faithfulness, what might he do through our lives if we follow Enoch's example of walking with God?